The town of Bath, Illinois. You can see my van parked on the other side of the park. And this monument says Bath, surveyed by Abraham Lincoln, November 1st, 1836. This morning I'm in Beardstown, Illinois to visit the site of the Beardstown Courthouse, which is this building over here where Lincoln successfully defended a man indicted for murder that he had actually rocked in his cradle. Next to it, the City Hall. Site of the Stephen A. Douglas speech for the Senate, August 11th, 1858. Now notice that we're just a couple of years away from the beginning of the Civil War. Yet no one here knew for certain that was going to happen. This part of the interpretive sign says, and I'll just read it so we've got it, there were more prosaic functions that brought Abraham Lincoln to this courthouse many times. Charles Reynolds in a rental dispute, Jonathan Gill in a divorce case, and he sued the Illinois River and Peoria and Hannibal railroads on behalf of local railroad promoter Charles Sprague. Tall, gangly man strode, perhaps with his client, to this courthouse, and entered here. He would have looked up at this City Hall engraving above the door. What we're going to see here is a video explanation by a local attorney here in Beardstown of the famous Almanac trial that took place here. Even though we know, of course, that Abraham Lincoln was here many, many times as the circuit roamed about this area, 8 months cycle time. So let's listen to it.
One of Abraham Lincoln's most famous trials took place in the courtroom where you're now standing. It came to be known as the Almanac trial and has been depicted in several movies over the years, although not totally accurately. I'm here to tell you the real story. Jack and Hannah Armstrong were friends of Mr. Lincoln ever since his days back in New Salem, Illinois, where he had gone shortly after leaving the family home in eastern Illinois. Mr. Lincoln was a young man, no friends, no family, no connections when he arrived in New Salem. Jack and Hannah's son, William Duff Armstrong, at age 24 had been accused of murder. He was accused of participating in a drunken brawl a few hundred yards away from a Methodist camp meeting near Walker's Grove in Mason County, Illinois. He and one James Norris were accused of murdering John Preston Metzger. Metzger died 3 days later. Jack Armstrong was dying when he asked his wife Hannah to go and see Mr. Lincoln to help their son Duff. In fact, Jack said, "Hannah, if it's necessary, sell our family farm of 40 acres to get the money to pay Mr. Lincoln." The story is that Lincoln took the case and never charged Hannah a cent. In fact, Jack Armstrong died before the trial. The prosecution called first Dr. Charles Parker, a medical doctor in the community, to testify concerning the wounds to the victim's skull.
Everything in this courtroom is the same as it was when Lincoln was here, except for the dimension of the courtroom and the location of the windows. Everything else has been redone, simply because in that time period, in order to continue to use it, it had to be done. It is possible, the docent thinks, that these railings may have been original. And if that's the case, you can well imagine that Abe put his hand on one of these as he walked to and fro in this area. It's also possible that this podium for the judge is original, but not known to be. Your picture of the young man Duff. clerk's interpretation of the moment the almanac was presented to the jury. Notice that his tie is undone. It was a May day and apparently a very warm day. This picture is an original picture taken immediately after the trial. As Lincoln exited the courthouse and walked down that street to a hotel where he, the judge, and other attorneys that were on circuit stayed, the photographer prevailed upon him to let him take his picture.
Frame inflicted by James Norris first, and also the wound to the front of the skull inflicted by Duff Armstrong using the slung shot. Then he called Charles Allen the chief witness. Charles Allen repeated what he had said in Norris's trial in Mason County several months earlier, that he had been the eyewitness to this drunken brawl, saw the blows, and indicated that he had seen them by the light of the full moon. On cross-examination, Abraham Lincoln started with Dr. Parker. He had Dr. Parker explain that a wound to the back of the skull could cause injury to the front of the skull, which could be fatal. Further, he cross-examined Charles Allen, giving him frequent opportunities to recant his testimony, but Charles Allen stood firm, saying that he had seen the whole incident by the light of the full moon. Mr. Lincoln then called for an almanac from 1857, pointing out to the jury that the almanac said the moon set at 12:03 a.m. the morning of August 30th, 1857. Which simply means that the moon could not have been overhead at 11 o'clock, which Charles Allen said was the time of the incident. Hugh Fullerton, the state's attorney, took a recess and asked the court for time to secure a second almanac from 1857. This he did, but the new almanac supported the almanac Mr. Lincoln had with him in the courtroom for that trial. The testimony was perhaps flawed. An eyewitness to the trial wrote a full account in his own hand from memory shortly after the trial occurred. And he indicated that it may not have been the almanac that Mr. Lincoln had brought. It may not have been Mr. Lincoln's cross-examination of the doctor that won the trial. It may have been his emotional closing argument to the jury of 6 young men. In fact, the eyewitness account says that he brought forth the fact that Hannah Armstrong, now a widow and an old woman, who was in the courtroom for the trial, had befriended him as a young man, helped him when he was lonesome, friendless, and penniless in New Salem, Illinois. He went on to say how Jack Armstrong, Hannah's late husband, had taken young Lincoln in to their own home and fed him, clothed him, mended his clothes, gave him shelter. This all appealed to the 6 jurymen. In fact, the eyewitness said there were tears in the eyes. The jury didn't even retire. They just found Duff innocent. Lincoln's handwritten instructions to the jury are still available, and a copy of them is downstairs in the Lincoln room if you wish to go down and look at it. I should point out to you that Lincoln's instructions to the jury pointed out that James Norris had already been convicted of the murder, and therefore they might consider acquitting Duff Armstrong.
Now my snail's trail. Here the jury sat. Lincoln surely would have been strolling this way. Different positions. An ideal place to stand actually here. I'll show it to you from over there in a moment. Looking at this iconic face again. Try to picture that face standing right there, talking to you as a juror. Try to take all that you know and feel about that man from history, all the myths. See if you can feel the emotion he might have generated here.
Trial. I should point out that Lincoln defended Duff Armstrong in a white suit. In fact, the only known picture of Mr. Lincoln taken in a white suit was taken in Beardstown shortly after the trial by a local photographer, is shown on the east wall of this courtroom.